Hello, hello. This is Lyndol Descant, and welcome to the second episode of Music as a Metaphor. So, last week was the first episode, and I gave a very long intro to who I am and my journey with music, my personal journey with music, and how I ended up here talking to you. So this week we have a lot of fun topics that we want to get into, such as the Nazis and the war on frequency. Then getting into a bit of 432, and then also changing direction and talking about the 4 different levels of growth that you can experience in anything, but as they relate to a musical instrument. So before we do that, though, since it is the second episode, I'm going to give a little bio and intro, a short one this time, about who I am and what the show is about. So I'm a musician, artist, and educator. I'm a researcher and a philosopher. And after 8 years in a corporate job, I pulled a U-turn and went to Montreal and then Paris to study jazz. So I'm basically a Renaissance woman now. I'm a musician, composer, online creator, content creator, artist, poet. I love to inspire others to find their authentic path. And for me, creativity is really about healing trauma, growing into who you're meant to be, and strengthening your connection with the divine. That's what it's been for me. And it's, been quite some time now, over 20 years since I just dove headfirst into my own creativity and really developing my own voice. It's always been very important to me to stay unique. And so that's what this show is going to be about, because in that process, which has been a very long, slow process, I'm just passionate about inspiring others to develop their unique gifts and share them. So I want to just explain a little bit more about what this show is. This is a short little blip on what music as a metaphor is about as I'm envisioning it. So when I was in my 20s and having my awakening, I was given the guidance to study music as a metaphor for the spiritual journey I was taking. It was a very daunting, I knew it was going to be a long process, that patience was going to be needed. It was going to be a daily practice. And in order to succeed, I really did need to develop my patience, my focus, my creativity, my confidence. The war for my soul would be won little by little, day by day, through the long-term commitment. And this was just exactly the process of learning piano, especially when you're picking it up as an adult. So I also, at that time, I knew I needed to heal my traumas. I needed to release emotions that had been stored in my body. I needed to develop emotional maturity. I needed to face my shadow self. So playing music, writing sincere songs, it's a great way to do this work. And alchemically, you're taking something and turning it from a dark, painful thing into something beautiful. And that can release you from it. So you are mastering it when you turn it into a song or express it as music, whatever it is that you think you'll be chained to for the rest of your life. You don't have to be. You can get free of it. And it won't lurk inside your subconscious and run you like a program anymore once you can face it and transform it. So this interpersonal work, it does take a while. I'm still on this journey. I've been on it for at least 23 years now, I guess, is maybe 25. And it's made concrete. Oh, I see. Okay, let me start over. This interpersonal work takes a while, maybe lifetimes. So this instrument, my piano, and my voice was my anchor. It made it concrete, whereas life can pull you away from this interior work and make it seem like it's not important when it truly is the most important thing you can do. So by linking your spiritual journey with the musical journey, it helps you to give it weight and keep it front and center at all times. Okay? Music is such an amazing thing. Nothing else in the world like it. It's concrete, mathematically perfect. It's physical, objective, ethereal, emotional, energetic, subjective. Good musicians and good music are a balance between the 2 hemispheres of our brain. And it truly is a bridge between this world and other dimensions, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. So there's another way it can be used as a metaphor, and that's to transcend the limits of our own logic and language, which some say is booby-trapped to keep us in the material plane. Okay, so let me say that again. It helps you to transcend the limits of your logic and your language, which some say, and I would agree, is booby-trapped to keep you in the material plane or the 3D. So music helps us comprehend and think in higher ways, and it busts through that limiting logic. So that's just a little introduction to what this show will be about. 5 o'clock on Tuesdays, that's 5 o'clock Eastern. And so that sort of opens the door for a lot of topics, which you'll see today, as we're going to start with a very controversial topic, and one that I was discussing recently with Billy Ray on Infinite Fringe. Now, if you're not new to the alternative community, then I'm sure that this is something that you've maybe heard of, discussed before, but maybe if you're not a musician, or even if you are a musician, maybe it's never quite made sense. It's a topic you've heard of, but haven't quite really comprehended. And it's something that I intend to explore in detail over the coming months. It's research that I really just started. And this is so funny because this is exactly... I just have to share something that's happening over here. I made notes for this talk that we're about to do. And as I'm opening it, technology always tends to be a little bit tricky for me in situations. Like, things happen to me through technology that nobody would believe. And they're always like, oh, it's just you. But somehow, maybe it is just me, I turned my document into, I believe it's Arabic, which I don't speak. I didn't even think that was an option to do on my iPad. It's rather incredible. So I'm going to just work from the short version that I have. And like I said, it's a topic that we're going to expand on each week, or maybe every other week, as I'm doing ongoing investigation in this. And I really want to invite anybody listening today that hears this, that if there's something that you can add to the discussion or correct me on, please, because I'm really just engendering the conversation and exploring it from my own perspective. And I recognize that, there's really a lot out there that might not even be accessible on the internet anymore that maybe was before. And I'm mainly using the internet at this point to do my research. So there could be some limitations, some skewing here. Certainly most of the articles that I read were discounting this. And what are we talking about? Well, it's a very common notion in the truth community that the Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, ordered in 1939 to replace all the tuning forks with 440 hertz. Okay. The story is that he proposed this world standard of tuning A above middle C to 440. Now, why did he do this? The most common explanation is that he was weaponizing music, and he was creating a war on consciousness by using this certain frequency that causes disease and destruction in the human body and mind. So before we get into whether or not this claim is true, I want to explain a little bit about what we're talking about, because even if you are a musician, you might not have studied about tuning, or you don't need to know about the physics of sound in order to be a musician. So I'd like to explain it as if you don't know anything about it, for anyone who would like this to be clear. From the physics of sound, we study sound waves through hertz, which are cycles per second. This is how we measure all electromagnetic waves, and sound waves are a certain portion of electromagnetic waves. Okay? So when we are talking about tuning, what we've been doing for many centuries now is taking the A above middle C and tuning it to a specific frequency. And then there has been different types of tuning methods, but in the current equal temperament, what we've done is we've taken that 440, let's say it's 440 hertz on A, and then we've created the notes and the intervals from that one. So that's sort of like a relative pitch way of doing it, right? So that A isn't where that 440 is important, because then mathematically speaking, it's creating the other numbers. It's creating the mathematics from there. And before this, before this 1939 standardization that happened, that did indeed happen. The question that we're going to talk today is whether or not this really came from the Nazis, but it did indeed become the standard in 1939 that 440 became the hertz that we used for that A, and then we tuned everything off of that. Now, before that, it could have been anywhere from 415 hertz to 450 hertz, okay? And when I looked up on a chart today, because I've had the question, like, how many hertz constitutes, one note before it moves up a half step, before it's shifted to, let's say, A sharp, right? Or goes down to A flat. And I saw a range today from about 415 to 466. Anywhere in there would be considered A. Once you get above that, like 470, now you're talking about A sharp. And if you get below, like, let's say 414, then technically you're speaking of A flat or G sharp. Okay. So that's the range for a note. It's a lot of hertz. And can the ear hear this? Yes, it can hear it. And depending on how good of hearing you have for music, which certainly gets better the more that you're attempting to listen and identify notes, then you're very sensitive to it. But for our purposes, let's consider that all of those, that whole range is A. And before a certain point, they were just using their ears to do it before hertz. But we'll get into that history a little bit later. So let's just say, to bring you up to speed, there was a range before this point, before 439. Like, for example, I think the standard in France in the late 1800s might have been 435. Okay. And another, I think I've heard of 432. So this is what I'm reading online. I'm not hearing so much that there was a standardized 432 or 444, even though it might have been proposed by an individual composer, but there was also more freedom, and it was being used for specific reasons. Okay. So suddenly there's this range, right? You could hear an A tuned anywhere between 415 and 450, most likely. And suddenly in 439, there was a standardization that happened, and it was that 440 was it. Okay. Why did he do this? This is the question. And many people believe that it was to create a monopolization of the music industry by imposing this frequency. It herded populations into greater aggression, psychosocial agitation, and emotional distress, predisposing people to physical illness and financial imposition, profiting the agencies, and companies engaged in the monopoly. So that was from Leonard Horowitz, which Billy Ray talked to me about, and I've since done a lot of studying. And he is a big voice in the alternative community on this topic. So, hey, that's what a lot of people feel like happened, right? So just think about it. If it is true, most of us that are listening to this, we have only ever heard music at 440, because since that time, the music that we listen to is, for the most part, 440. It is been tuned to this certain frequency, and that's all that we've been hearing. So it's interesting to think that, like, we've been listening to a dystopian version of music our whole lives, no matter what, right? And many people would say that rock and roll was the devil's music, right? As it proceeded from there, many people would say that there was a devaluation, a de-evolution of music from that point. And you could argue that. I could possibly argue that, to be honest with you. But for me, growing up, this music was great. I loved it. I've had many spiritual experiences listening to music. So it's interesting to think that, number one, music is that incredible that maybe it still can bring, incredible experiences even in this dystopian version, if this is the truth. But also that's all we've known. And I do see that as a metaphor, something that's difficult to swallow, but something that intuitively I think I felt that there's many things that we've never really experienced that humans are meant to experience, and the true power of music is possibly one of them. This could have been co-opted before any of us were born, and it's become so the norm, and music is so much about repetition that it doesn't feel that way to us per se, but that we wouldn't know the difference either, right? Same thing as if we're drinking poison water. Are there things in our water that aren't good for us? We wouldn't necessarily know that. We wouldn't necessarily feel the difference. We wouldn't even recognize in our bodies the difference, the way it would feel if we were drinking from pure water as opposed to tainted water. So I think that's an interesting metaphor that comes up straight away with this notion, and something that resonates for me, because people claim that there's things that can be done with music that I believe that they can, though I have no proof. For example, healing, like truly healing, restoring health, enhancing cognitive abilities. Imagine truly powerful music being played to children, live music being played to children as they're growing, and what that would do to their bodies and their minds and their development. Already when children learn instruments, it does a lot for their cognition, connecting the two sides of their brain. It does already amazing things. And it's just amazing to me to think that it's even more. It's even more than we can imagine at this point. So is it true then? Did the Nazi minister propaganda really ruin music before we were born? Has the music we've been listening to, from Beatles to Madonna, has it really just been weapons for our own destruction? I mean, if this were true, little thought experiment here, if it were true, what would that look like? Now that we're looking, 80 years later from that standardization, or about there, what would that look like in a society? I mean, would it mean maybe that we have endless wars? Would it possibly mean that we lose our moral compass? Would things like prioritize material success over family connection, would that become commonplace? And would these important family bonds be replaced by like soulless technology? I don't know, like fleshly addictions such as video games, drug abuse, obesity. Would all these things be widespread? Would it become commonplace to have an infinite growth that really doesn't take into account the natural balance we need with nature? Would common sense, become a rare genius, a rare form of genius? When you look at where society is, I think this is part of the reason that this is widely spread on the internet, because it's almost like we need this type of a theory to explain just how we've ended up where we are. And I think it's very possible that it's part of the picture. But the truth is, so far, I have not been able to find the smoking gun that says that that the Nazis did this on purpose, that it was definitely them, that this was all part of a Nazi plan. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not out there. And like I said, if anybody's come across that, I'd really love to see it. But for the most part, it's just not quite that simple, like many things in history. And I think it's important in the truth community to not proclaim things as fact if we don't have evidence for them. So this is mainly a theory at this point. Now, what do we know? What are the facts that we do know? Well, we do know that 440 Hertz didn't start with the Nazis. We know that it was proposed by a Prussian, Johann Heinrich Schreiber. I don't really speak German, so I'm not sure that that's correct, but he invented the tonometer in the early 1800s, and this was a means of measuring absolute pitch. Before this, it was all done by ear, and I'm sure their ears were exquisite, actually. I don't doubt that they were able to tune to exactly what they wanted. But we really didn't have this Hertz system or this exact measuring of the notes until he came around. And he was the one who theorized on 440, according to the research I've been looking at. So 440 was first proposed all the way back in 1834 at the Stuttgart Convention, then again at the Vienna Conference in 1885, then again in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, before its most famous adoption in the 1939 International Conference in London, of which I've been speaking of. Okay, now Goebbels was not, the minister of propaganda was not at this conference. We know that. There were 3 Germans. And is it possible that he just told them what to do and they went there? Yes, but it's a little different than some of the stories that are told like he's the one who persuaded it. And it's also a little bit hard to believe it was only from the Germans, because it was unanimously voted. So if it was really being pushed by them, they're about to go on the verge of war, why would they want to adopt something like that. I'm not sure. There's some questions about it. If there is any actual evidence. But for the most part, as far as the standardization, it looked like a collaboration, and it looks like it was something that had been a long time in coming. So that's how we ended up with 440. Now, some people say that there's two very practical reasons that we went to 440. The first one was that all through the 1800s, the pitch had been being pushed up on A. It had originally been down maybe more around 420, 415. But as they started playing in bigger rooms pushing the pitch up, it started to create like a bigger sound that filled the room. And this is what's interesting about sound and pitch. When you get into producing, dealing with how you can make a note sound bigger or louder, but it's not actually volume, and how we can fill a room more with a brighter sound, but it's still the same pitch. It's really incredible, the precision that you can get to expression with music. So they were playing in bigger rooms in the 1800s. They weren't these small little chamber rooms. And because of that, they wanted the sound to fill. So pushing that hertz up made it fill the room better. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason was that you were starting to, let me go back. There's as they were doing this, before I go to the second reason, let me explain that as they were doing this, many of the singers were having strained voices. So there was sort of a compromise at 440. Like 440 is still filling the room, but it's not pushing it all the way up, which is straining these singers' voices. And supposedly Vivaldi was a big proponent of that because he was so vocal. And this is one of the reasons that Vivaldi was pushing 432. Some people say not necessarily because of some of the amazing implications of 42, which we will get to shortly. So 440 was like a compromise that a lot of people were making. And it was also going to be a nice standardization because there was more and more radio broadcasting happening from the early 1900s, through this 1939. And so having a standard pitch also made sense for that reason. So 440 was kind of the obvious choice. This is the counter argument that's made. And you really can't, dispute that either. I mean, those are logical reasons to do it, but was that the only reason? It's when as much as many people have really researched about things behind the scenes, then it is easy to think that it was more than just that. What am I referring to? Well, there is a lot of evidence to show that the Nazis were doing all kinds of experiments trying to figure out how to use music as a weapon. That is a fact. And that is something that I'm going to get into in another discussion on a different upcoming podcast. So that is for sure. And it wasn't just the Germans, right? A lot of different alphabet agencies, and many also say the Rockefellers, which I'm about to also do some deep diving into how true those claims are. But from what I'm seeing on the surface, there is documentation that they were as well by this 1939 point. So that means that you can't be completely naive about this either and act like, oh, it's just because of these very, benign reasons that 440 came about, when there is a lot of evidence that the power of music was known by the Nazis and known by these power players at the time. And there's definite evidence now that, 80 years later, they know a lot more about that. And recently, if you've seen that movie, Leave the World Behind, there is deadly radiation that's released through a sonic sound. And I've heard claims, which I cannot refute or I cannot deny and I cannot promote as true, but I'm just saying that I've heard some legitimate talking or in detail talking that there's even codes put in the movie itself, that they've gotten to the ability of being able to play with frequency on such a level that it can be embedded. And this is also something that I've studied and seen as being true, that they're embedding frequencies, embedding things in music even since the 1960s. And they're not positive things. Now, I'm sure you can use it the other direction. It's something that I would like to do with my music more from a pure intention place, because I believe that it can go the other way. But there's absolute evidence that it's been used the opposite direction in putting things in music that creates a frequency that disturbs people, makes them feel unwell, makes you paranoid, maybe all kinds. It can have many different reactions because the studies show that it can be subjective, but there have been many studies done. That part is for sure. The other thing that maybe you've heard of, these are just a few other examples. In Iraq, there was a weapon used that I believe confused some soldiers on the Iraqi side, I believe, and they surrendered immediately. There's a story out of Cuba using some sonic weapons. This was way back when. And that's not even to bring into account many of the connections that have been made between musicians and the military-industrial complex in this country alone. That's something that I want to delve into. There's some really great music research that's been done on that. And many of you are probably all aware of that, but that plays into this same place that even if it's not specifically true that the Nazis changed it to 440 frequency, or we don't have the evidence, we do have enough evidence to suggest that music has been used against us in many different ways, maybe if not all music. Much of the music that we've been listening to, and it wouldn't really be that crazy to think that it was based in a frequency that would promote those agendas, that this 440 frequency sort of creates disharmony in human beings that then makes them more easily programmed, more easily manipulated, just less healthy of human beings, all kinds of things, exactly like what the theories are saying. So that's sort of the full circle that I want to come with that though we don't have specific evidence, or I can't present that specific evidence today, a lot of what you'll see when it's refuting that, it makes it just like, oh, of course it's music is, that's such a silly claim, but it's really not a silly claim when you look at many of the other things that have happened in the last 80 years. So it's something that I'm going to continue researching. I hope others will just at least be aware of the fact that our music might have been messed with on that fundamental of a level. And it's one of the main reasons why I'm looking to inspire people to pick their instruments up and take music back, right? Because the music that you're listening to, is it uplifting you? Is it, helping you to become the best version of yourself? You might say, well, I like the music. It's great. But the truth is, psychologically, it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. Music is about repetition. It could be the worst piece of music you've ever heard, but if you hear enough, you'll like it, or you'll at least connect with it. And then 30 years later, you'll be nostalgic about it. It's just the nature of music. It's that incredible of a thing that if with enough repetition, it'll go right in. And you know this with jingles on TV, bad commercials, bad songs. And in many ways, that's what's happened. I mean, if you're in your teenage years and you're listening to, I don't know, Britney Spears, and she's coming along for the ride as you're growing up and you're going through these rite of passages, well, you will think it's great music, right? And that's not really what we're talking about. Because that's an emotional and a psychological connection. And that's exactly the insidiousness of it. If that's being used against you, getting you to relate to music that in reality isn't the best, most uplifting message for you. It's not the most empowering, but you're letting it go boop right in, right into your subconscious. So it's about programming. And we're going to get more into all of that soon with some of Leonard Horowitz's research and some specific studies. But I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about one of the things that Lynn Horowitz does talk about, which is 432 or 444 hertz. So many people say, well, if this standardization happened, why 440? And I gave you some somewhat decent reasons. But if you're really looking into the full power of music and the mathematics of music, then 432, by my estimation, seems like a better option. The reasons being, 432 is just a really magical number. And I talk about this a lot on Billy Ray's podcast, Infinite Fringe, that you can check out. But I want to mention, I don't want to repeat too much here, but I want to mention a few really cool things about 432. Let me see here. So I'm sorry, it wasn't Vivaldi that was promoting 432, it was Verdi. Okay, he was promoting 432. And one of the things that's been said around that was that mathematically, 432 is consistent with the patterns of the universe vibrating with pi, the golden ratio. They point to how this pitch can be connected to everything from nautilus shells to the work of the ancients, including the construction of the Great Pyramid. And I talked about that a little bit on Billy Ray's podcast. Let me see here, the Giza Pyramid base, if you multiply that by 43,200, which is 432 with two zeros, then it equals the circumference of the Earth. And then when you take the Great Giza height and you multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. So using this 432 derivative, you get a direct connection between the pyramid and the knowledge of the exact size of the Earth, which is incredible. Another thing that's amazing about it is it has these factors of 8. And 8 is the Schumann resonance of the Earth. This is where it rests. This is the hertz, the cycles per second of our Earth. And it also is the alpha waves on our human brain, okay? Alpha waves are when we're in a state of wakeful relaxation. It can lead to increased mental clarity and focus, making it easier to stay on track and be productive throughout the day. So this is where they're saying, like, if you listen to 432 hertz music, then you're getting in more of an optimal place to do work and to be creative and to it's a state that for many people it's difficult to get in these days with all of the distraction and everything going on. So another interesting thing is another factor of 432 is 16, and humans tend to vibrate between 16 and 32 hertz, which is interesting. Now, there's other claims. So there's facts, there's numbers, and then there's claims, right? And I want to kind of present all of them because I think it's when we're dealing with trying to get outside of the matrix or outside of this box we've been put in that we're not really allowed to get outside of, which is a lot of experimenting, and we have to use our imaginations a little bit, and we have to use our subjective experiences. So I think it does matter to hear what some people's opinions are that have spent time with this and thought, even if they don't have, the study to prove it. So one idea is that it affects different frequencies, like different frequencies connect to different chakras in our body. So 440 is more in the third eye and the thinking, while 432 is more in the heart and the feeling. And so 432 music increases the spiritual development of the listener, and it kind of has, more of the ability to keep you connected with your soul or your spiritual identity, which is definitely one of the interesting things of our modern society, and something I would say has happened in the last 80 years, and that's being completely 100% identified with the material world. That just wasn't the case 100 years ago and beyond. For most of human existence, it's been a balance between the physical and the spiritual, just as a factor of everyday life. But somehow in the last 80 years, it's like, oh no, that's fantasy, or you can kind of think of it abstractly but don't really identify. The only thing that's real is the five senses. And this has also been probably a byproduct of scientism. So our music would then also maybe be creating that intellectual space as opposed to getting more into your feeling, emotional, and spiritual side. Can't prove that, but I think it's interesting. Now, there is a study. You might be saying, well, what about real studies? Well, there hasn't honestly been that many studies. 440 has been so dominant that it hasn't even been questioned. But some of the studies that have been done, one I found was by Maria Renaud, and she said that people found music played at 440 hertz uncomfortable, oppressive, irritating, and aggressive, and narrow-minded. And these same subjects found that music played at 432 was correct, complete, peaceful, clear, pleasing, sun-like, like the sun. So that was one of the more straightforward studies. But I would also say some of these studies could be skewed by the fact that, like I told you, it's what is repeated over and over again. So if you've always heard 440, then 432 might actually sound strange or feel strange to you, and you might react more to what's familiar. But online, there's tons of different videos that you can take where it's like, listen to this 432 version and listen to this 440 version. And it's fun. I would recommend that you kind of try that a little bit to see for yourself. But I'm a little bit skeptical because you're coming through the digital medium. And I do believe there's a lot of standardization that is happening within that digital medium. Now, that doesn't mean specifically that it would retune it to 440, though I'm doing research to see if that would be the case. But it is probably the case that there's other things embedded in it that would make it not a pure comparison. Things that maybe 432 doesn't seem that different from 440, and maybe that's why, right? That hearing the two on a stringed instrument in a small room, you might feel the effects more. There's also the question of the desensitizing of us and whether or not we really have the ability to feel these differences. Hearing is one thing, and I think you would hear it, or it'd be interesting to see if you're able to hear it. 432 can definitely sound flatter, and it's interesting because I listened to a version online, and my immediate reaction was I liked the 440 better, to be honest with you. But the more I listened to it, the more my body liked the 432. That was my reaction. So you can listen to it for yourself. But I'm a very sensitive person, which is part of the reason these topics make sense to me. I know, and I've had students that don't feel it. They don't even really feel the difference between a digital piano and a real piano, which for me is night and day. The difference between playing on it with acoustic strings, really vibrating, versus a digital signal is like two different worlds, two different musics. But some of my students, they really don't even feel it, and they do tend to be more of the logic-oriented students. So there's also the question of the subjectiveness of how sensitive the listener is. So what I did to sort of sidestep this was I tuned my piano to 432. It ended up to be quite difficult to do because the piano tuner I used, which goes by ear, he was trained by his father. He's been tuning for over 40 years and impeccable at his craft. And he had agreed to do it, but when he showed up, he had all these weird reactions and resistance and got nervous about doing it for me. And part of it was, and he explained to me later, it was like getting out of a rut. He had only ever done 440 and he didn't feel quite equipped, like he was really going to be able to do it. So there is some question as to how pure my 432 was. And definitely there's question now that it's been over a month. I definitely don't think it's held very well. And that was part of his argument too, that our instruments have been designed to hold 440. And so tuning them to 432 or going up 444 might be a little bit better. It might not hold it well because it's the bending of the board. There's mechanics of the actual instrument. Now, I don't play guitar, but I'm actually picking it back up again because I do believe it'd be easier to tune your guitar to 432 and really experiment more. But what I did was that very first night played a bunch of songs on my 432 piano to see what my reaction was. And I want to play one of them for you now. This is the original Let It All Crumble, which I talked about extensively as being a song about courage and calm in the middle of a storm. I really don't tend to play it out that much, or I just haven't. I think I've only played it with my trio one time, and I've only played it out live a few times. But I've been really playing it a lot more just by myself. And so what I'm about to play is a solo version of me playing my original Let It All Crumble on my newly tuned 432 hertz piano. Watching it crumble and fall to the ground. The ground shakes shakes and rumbles and I stumble all around. I never thought I would be the one to say, but I'm sure glad it all turned out this way. Nothing around me sparkles to my heart dances tonight. Nothing around me shines to my mind sees the light. Nobody's saying that everything will be alright, but our hearts can feel the change, the truth we will no longer fight. Let it all crumble, let it all fall. This illusion is so bearing on me all. Lies, lies, and more lies, lure the tired to sleep. Waking isn't easy, the deception makes you weak. Look at the darkness, and the darkness turns to light. Love your oppressors. There's a need to fight. Love those who wronged you, and be free from trying to be right. You must unlock your love, let your soul take flight. Nothing around me sparkles to my heart dances tonight. Nobody is saying that everything will be alright, but our hearts can feel the change, the truth we will no longer fight. Oh, 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 oh. We will no longer fight. Let it all crumble, let it all fall. Okay, so that was it. How was it for you? It's still coming through the digital medium, but it's from a 432 tuned piano. Now, I can tell you from my experience when I played it, it was incredible. I have always loved when I get chills from music or can start to feel almost like my light body or, my etheric body or something beyond myself. It's like I just become electric, alive. It feels so good. Music, because of my sensitivity, I guess, I've always been able to feel that. And that's one of my favorite parts about music. And I felt that when I was playing this. And it wasn't just that. It was my hands. Sometimes I feel blocks in my hands. Sometimes my hands won't move fast enough or, I just feel like I have a spirit, an inspiration coming through, but my hands can't quite handle it, right? And that's the big training part of a musician is how do you train your hands to be able to purely express what you hear and feel? on the inside. And this was one of those moments where it was flowing through my hands so easily, and my hands felt so good. They just felt good. On top of that, I was hearing these incredible like harmonics, which harmonics are whenever you play a note, you have these reverberations. Like you have like the octave, and you have like then like the third above that. You have these sort of echoes, and they're quieter than the actual pitch. But they're just a result of striking that note and these harmonics that get hit at the same time. And for some reason, those harmonics were louder, and they were almost like rubbing up against each other in an interesting way as I was moving from note to note. And it was creating a violin sound, a sustained violin sound that was just amazing. So for me, this particular song was very different, playing it on 432. Voice-wise, I think it was a little bit trickier for me to sing, I think, because I am so used to 440. That normally, I mean, I'm an alto, and normally I love singing lower. Low is my jam, but it almost felt like the pitch, was a little bit pitchy trying to hit that. If you want to check out this for yourself, I set this particular song to some empowering images, some interesting images to sort of use symbol and music to fight in this frequency war. If this is the case, that music is being used against us, which I would argue that's the case. Now, whether it's coming from the Nazis or not, I can't say. Who it's coming from, I couldn't say exactly, but I would argue that there's enough evidence that music is being used against people at this point, that I want to take it back and go the other way, right? To neutralize it and to send out empowering vibes. So this is one of the videos that I put out, and I try to put these videos out every Friday on my YouTube channel. If you want to check that out under my name, Lyndol Descant. And I'll say more about that at the end, but yeah, that's 432. And I'll be doing more next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about why 432, why get into a little bit more of the studies and what people are saying about it, and also a little bit more of how 440 itself is being shown to be dissonant. But for now, I think we'll just switch gears and go to a different topic altogether. And that is coming from a book that I'm reading that, even though I'm only halfway through, I just hit the mic, I would actually recommend. This is a book called Own Your Authority. Follow your instincts, radiate confidence, and communicate as a leader people trust. This is by Marisa Stantoro. Now, I haven't been in the corporate world for some time. Like I said, I did a U-turn a long time ago and got out of the corporate world. And this book is very corporate oriented, but it's amazing. It's actually really speaking to where I'm at with my career and stepping into a place of owning my voice, which is part of the reason that I'm here today speaking, because I've been much more comfortable to just do an hour set of music, to play my music, to compose, to paint, to write even. Speaking like this has been more difficult for me unless I'm really in an educational environment, mainly one-to-one, but I did do a lot of groups. But I find myself wanting to step into a place that I think is uniquely mine, given my experience. And it's a place of inspiring all kinds of people to not only pick up their instrument, but to get involved with their own creativity, as it can make such a difference in these times. And it's really, I can't understate that. So learning an instrument for many people is daunting. When you learn it as a kid, though, you're learning everything new. And so it's not quite you don't have the emotional baggage and the psychological blocks that come along with it. When you're learning an instrument as an adult, it can be quite difficult. And this book sort of explains some of the stages that you go through with growth. And I think it's good to understand these stages as you're picking up an instrument. It sort of explains a very common progression. So the first stage is unconscious incompetence, okay? And this is a stage where you have no insight on how to do something, okay? You're not even aware that you are incapable. You rebuff any value in learning a new skill to achieve success. You lean on the skills that you do have. This may be deemed a stagnant stage because you are knee deep in denial. Unless you accept its relevance, you will be unable to move to step 2. Okay, so a lot of people might want to learn piano, or they might want to learn to sing better, but they really aren't interested in learning how little they know, right? And some people might be playing around with an instrument, and this is a stage that I think stops a lot of adults because it's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing to have to see how bad you are and to not even know how bad you are, right? And you can be at this stage for a little while. Picking up an instrument is very hard. And so you could even be in this stage for 1 or 2 years where you don't even really realize like how far you have to go, or how little you know. You don't even know that yet. And this is why for many adults I talk about you really need 2 years before if you're going to pick up an instrument, you have to commit to it for 2 years no matter what. And during that time, you cannot be obsessed with trying to figure out how much you know or how little you know. Now, there's some people who have beginner's luck, and they might learn a few chords and then they start writing songs and then they get out to open mics. And I would completely support that, because you can actually, you don't have to know everything in music to play good music. You can play great music with 2 chords, right? You can have something to say and you learn it and you just take off. But typically, even if you do that, then somewhere around 2 years, I would say you start to realize, oh, I thought this music was so great, but in reality, it's kind of getting boring. I'm only playing 2 chords. I've been singing out of pitch. One thing that happened to me was, realizing that you weren't quite playing in time. You thought you were, all kinds of things like that. You don't even know that you don't know it, right? So then that leads you, though, to step 2, which is conscious incompetence. This is a painful stage, and this is what makes a lot of adults quit, is when suddenly you do realize how much you have to do, or you realize how bad you sound. And you will sound bad in the beginning. That's just part of it. If you can push through this one, then this is the motivation, right? And this is where supposedly a lot of people quit around this stage, because it's painful to recognize like how much work you're going to need to put in. And this is why I often try to get adults to commit to a long-term plan, that you want this so badly that you know that it's going to take a while, and you're okay with that, and you're not constantly looking for results, and you're not constantly comparing yourself, and you're not constantly wondering like, if I'm this bad now, how can I ever get good? Because there's something that happens, and it's exponential growth. The more that you learn in music, then the faster you learn in music. And so it takes you in the beginning so long to learn one thing. But as time goes on, that collapses for every new skill, because it all builds on each other. And so if you can make it through this conscious incompetence phase, then now your music is really starting to flow and you're feeling good about it, and you've put the work in, so it's not something you're going to abandon. It's a gift now for yourself because you've put that time in. And I would say this is somewhere between 2 and 3 years, but really it's different for everybody. Then that's when you get to conscious competence, okay? So now you're swimming in the deep end of the pool. Not only have you learned how to perform the skills you need, but you are working on perfecting you. Oh my gosh. I don't know when the mic went off, but I think I've been talking for some time without the mic on. So, that's a bummer. Well, I guess we will come back to that next week. This is Lyndol Descant. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We're going to have to hit next time the 4 stages of growth. Apologize for that technical difficulty there. What I do want to say is that you can find me on YouTube at Lyndol Descant. That's Lyndol. My last name is Descant, Descant. And I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I do a weekly video, Friday night video premiere that's designed to uplift and inspire. musicians and non-musicians alike. On Tuesdays, I'm now dropping the previous week's episode from freeworld.fm. On my Instagram and my Twitter, I just try to do short content, to keep you inspired and going during the week. And I'm also on BitChute under the same name. The best place maybe to go is my website though, Lyndol, Lyndol.com. Lyndol.com is where all my links are. And also my blog, and I have recently started blogging once a week, and I'm also have a Substack under my same name. So I'm all over the place. You can connect with this material in a variety of ways. I just did release an article today talking about the Nazis in 440. So you can check out more on that there. So just to sum up, 432 Let It All Krumble is on my YouTube. You can listen for yourself there, see the images that I put that go along with it.